Okay, let's get started. Thanks for the kind introduction, Alex. I'm really pleased to see such a great turnout of people wanting to learn more about applying open science practices to your research. I'm really looking forward to getting to know you over the next day and a half. We will take some breaks in between. Please come and say hello, have a chat. Love to hear about sort of your projects and the research that you're doing as well. And if you have any specific questions about your research, I'm happy to help however I can. Thanks to the people that also responded to the pre-workshop questionnaire I sent out. I've tried to edit and adjust the workshop and what we're doing in response to where everyone is at when it comes to how they're applying open science practices. Any questions whatsoever, just stick up your hand and I can answer them throughout as well. So to get started, I'm just going to give just a brief introduction about why you should be applying open science practices to your research and an overview for what we're going to be doing over the next day and a half. And to give a bit of background about my research, I'm not a methodologist, but one part of my research is looking at heart rate variability, which is very relevant for a conference on biological psychology, and looking at the role of heart rate variability in the development and maintenance of mental illnesses, looking at case-control differences, but also what is underlying these differences, particularly when it comes to social cognition. The other part of my research is looking at the role of the neuropeptide oxytocin in behavior and cognition, using more kind of gene expression type work, but also experimental work where I experimentally administer oxytocin nasal spray and look at differences in social cognition, both in psychiatric disorders like autism, but also healthy participants. And when you think of oxytocin, you think hype. And oxytocin has been one of those neuropeptides which has been hyped a lot. Originally, we had this early expectation of oxytocin is going to do a lot of great stuff, where it gets hyped up that it's going to be this wonder hormone that we should administer everywhere, to the point where a lot of people start doubting the research because a lot of negative studies come out. And this particular cycle can almost be applied to any research area where you have this initial expectation, but also doubt as to whether this actually works or not. And this sort of, I got into oxytocin research more when we were heading into this trough, where there was a lot of disillusionment about what this can do. And I really started asking a lot of questions in that, how can we actually improve this? Is oxytocin just hype, or is there something there? And that's what led me to get more of an understanding or more of a look into open science practices, because this is the way we're actually going to be able to get more reproducible research. If oxytocin, or if the effects of oxytocin aren't reproducible, what's the point? But if we're not actually applying the right practices, we're not able to actually understand whether there's something there or not. So I'm sure if you think about your own research area, you can probably see that there's this similar hype curve. And just try and think, whereabouts on this curve is your research area? Yeah, so this has led me to sort of the third area of my research, which is meta-research, which is sort of improving, understanding and improving research practices. And this is something I've sort of been looking into more in the past few years. I've done some work looking at how we actually do and how we plan sample sizes for the biological psychology research, but also ways of looking at null significant results as well. So a few different areas when it comes to meta-research. Now, I don't know about you, but I love science at high school, and I'm sure you did, which is why you're sitting here at a psychology conference. And I remember learning the scientific method at school, and thought this is really exciting. And this is how we learnt it, that you specify your hypotheses, you design your study, you collect your data, you analyze your data, you interpret your data, and you publish your experiment. And I'm sure this is what you learnt maybe in first year psychology or first year science and second year science. But the funny thing is, now you actually get to grad school, or you get to becoming a graduate student, you actually learn that the process is a little bit different. Whether you believe it or not, we are experiencing a reproducibility crisis in psychology. There was a recent survey where I think they asked over 1,500 people, 1,500 scientists, and almost everyone admitted there is a reproducibility crisis of some sort, where the results in psychology do not reproduce. And there's been a number of factors which have been suggested to contribute to this irreproducible research as well. And looking back at this sort of scientific method sort of cycle, there's a number of areas that we need to address. Firstly, well, there's a lack of replication. We also have low statistical power. And with low statistical power, your research is less likely to replicate. We have p-hacking as well, which we're going to get into really soon. Harking, which is hypothesizing after the results are known, and also publication bias and a lack of data sharing. Once we address all these issues, then we're more likely to get, or definitely going to get, more reproducible research in psychology. So the purpose of this workshop over the next day and a half is to address all these points. We're going to learn how to be able to do this and how you can apply it to your research. Open science is a lot of things. It's open access, which we're going to be getting into a little bit. It's open data, which we'll be getting into as well. And it's also open and reproducible research. And these are the three main things we're going to be looking at. But it is sort of a big umbrella, or there's a lot under there when it comes to open access. But also open science tools. And these open science tools and these ideas, they're not necessarily new. People have been suggesting since the 70s these ideas, but the thing is we haven't actually had the tools to be able to apply them. But now, with things like Open Science Framework, we can actually do these things. So I want to give you and walk through some of the benefits of open, reproducible science, just to get you a bit more excited about it and how you can apply it to your work. Firstly, it's actually better for society. Most people can't access research, or most people in the public. I was lucky enough, or I've been lucky enough to go to institutions where we have access to almost every single journal. It wasn't until maybe my second year of my PhD that I actually realized that a lot of people in different institutions can't access the same journals that I can. And I didn't actually realize that open access was a thing or something to be concerned about, because I already had access to all these things. But most people can't actually access research. And it's actually a human right. Open access research is a human right, which has been put in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that there's a right to share in scientific advancement and its benefits. Now, a lot of people, one of the main arguments for not actually posting our work or not bothering about this is that a lot of people in the public don't actually understand science. But the thing is, who are we to actually choose who deserves to read our work? I think the public is more interested in science than we think. A great example was the recent imaging of the black hole by Katie Bowman, and this absolutely took off on Twitter and Facebook. Just this, the idea and the story behind this, the imaging of the black hole. I think we also need to break down the stereotype. I love Google Auto-Suggest. It really reveals what a lot of people think. And this is truly what people think about scientists. And these are us, and this is what people think. And if we're actually making our research open to the public, we're more likely to break down these walls. And the other thing to consider as well is that the public is funding our research. And if we lose the public support, they're less likely. If the government suggests, oh, we're going to actually cut research funding, if the public don't care, they're just going to shrug. But if the public actually care about our research, they're more likely to say to the government, no, we actually care about this. You can't cut research. And if they cut research, we don't have jobs. We can't do our work. The second thing is that open science is better for your career. And this is really cool. This should get everyone interested. Is everyone familiar with preprints? Yes, I assume so. Quite often I do a similar talk like this, just to sort of more. I did a talk at a pharmacy conference a few weeks ago, and I asked the audience who has never heard of a preprint, and about half of them put their hand up. So we kind of think, oh yeah, preprints, they're great, but a lot of people, this is a new concept to them. But it is a complete scientific manuscript submitted to a public server. So I want to give you to talk about sort of the benefits of open access and open science and what really opened up my eyes to open science. I want to tell you a little story about this paper that I published. We're actually going to go through this paper a little bit later, I think later today. And this really opened my eyes to the benefits of open science and why we should be sharing our work. So I did a presentation about 2 years ago to my research centre. I've been looking into using Bayes factors in order to actually get a better understanding of null results in my research. Did a presentation locally, and I thought, well, you know, in the spirit of open science, what's the point of doing a presentation if it's only going to be shared with 20 people, which is why I'm recording this as well. I can put it online. So I put the slides online, and I put them on Twitter, and there was a lot of response, a lot of interest in this. So like, hang on a minute, this is maybe there's something to this. So I decided to actually write this up as a paper, which included both the manuscript, of course, but also the data and all the analysis that went through this tutorial. And I shared this preprint online, and it got a lot of interest, which was fantastic. But it also got a lot of feedback, both positive and negative, which was great. Well, it wasn't great because a lot of people told me I was wrong. And after that initial frustration, I looked into it and I realized, of course, they were actually right. And the thing is, if I didn't actually submit a preprint, I could have submitted this paper to a journal, which maybe wasn't that stats-minded. They would have thought this is great. It would have been published. And then after it would have been published, people would have said, hey, you're wrong. And that would have been really embarrassing, much more embarrassing than telling them I'm wrong for a preprint, because maybe I'd have to do a correction, or worse, a retraction. Retractions are fine because it's important to actually correct the scientific record, but it never looks good on your CV to have a retraction. So I potentially avoided a correction or a retraction because I posted my work as a preprint and got the feedback. The criticism stung a little bit, but in the end, I'd much rather that little bit of criticism then than the potential to actually retract or correct it. And so I got some feedback there, and then on top of that, in the course of this, my co-author for this actual paper moved to industry, which is fine, and he wasn't able to contribute. But I actually asked one of the people that contributed a lot, going, hey, would you like to be a co-author on this paper? And he said, yeah, that's fine. So I actually managed to find a collaborator by sharing my work on Twitter and sharing my work as a preprint and sharing my analysis there. And so he got on board, and that was fantastic. And then from there, when I actually submitted the paper, part of the cover letter, I said to the editor, going, hey, I've got this paper here, using my sort of boilerplate stuff when you submit your paper. By the way, this paper already has a lot of interest. It's got over 1,000 downloads for the preprint, and the editor was like, great, and it got sent straight off to review. Now, I don't know, to be honest, whether that actually did sway the editor, but I'm sure it didn't harm. So by doing that, you can actually get feedback on your work early. And eventually, it got published. It almost got into a really prestigious journal. It was very close, but I still got into a good journal regardless. But what was more important is that the paper got out there. So that was my preprint story. Now, open access provides an academic advantage. We all want this. When it comes to the relative citation rate between open access and non-open access, papers which are open access get cited more. And citations, impact factor is a really bad way of assessing the quality of the paper. You shouldn't be doing that. But a citation is a better way because it actually looks at the individual impact of a paper. And when you look at the citation rates, papers which are open access are more likely to be cited because they're more easily accessed as well. And that's across a range of fields. And that's really cool to see. Believe it or not, this is what Facebook used to look like. Everyone's seen the Facebook movie. You can sort of see the story behind that. But this is what the Facebook looked like. It was called the Facebook. And it's been iterated thousands of times. We all know what Facebook looks like now. And that is how things work when it comes to these online services. When it comes to Facebook, when you actually get feedback, someone at Facebook develops an idea. Maybe they want to increase engagement. And that's Facebook's bottom line. How long can you be staring at your phone? And then what they'll do is they'll basically do, say, an A/B test. They'll do an experiment and test it on maybe 100,000 users, or test it on a country like New Zealand or something. And then they'll get the feedback and they'll analyze the data, make some tweaks, and make some changes. If it's not working, they'll pivot to something else. And if it's working, they'll deploy it to all users. And so this process is really quick, really, really quick. It might happen over the course of, say, 5 months. Now, let's look at academia. So you develop an idea for a paper. You write it and you submit it to the journal. And if you're lucky, maybe you'll get feedback within sort of 3 months. If you're lucky, you get a revision offered, but if not, then your paper gets rejected and you'll need to try again. So feedback is really, really slow, and it can take up to 2 years to actually get the feedback on your paper. Compare this to sort of Facebook, where you get feedback almost instantly. So when you're submitting your preprint, you basically get this feedback and you're short-circuiting this feedback loop, and it's a really good way of doing this. So who's a PhD student here? Most people. Any postdocs? A few postdocs. Okay. Dorothy is fantastic on Twitter, and she posted this a few weeks ago, basically saying that a lot of people, when they're submitting their CVs, they're saying, well, they've got all these papers under review. But the thing is, your assessors can't actually assess how good these papers are. But if they're under review, you can submit a preprint and they can see this. So if you're a PhD student applying for positions as a postdoc, then actually having your preprint online and linking this in your CV is going to be a good thing. And more and more academic job descriptions are now stating that a familiarity with open access is a plus. Here is a list, and quite a lot of these are actually in Germany as well, that I've seen. I think it's good as well because open access and open science is really changing how research is done. Traditionally, when it comes to dissemination, you would inform your press office here, I've got a nice paper, tell everyone. But the emerging practice is you can actually use social media to inform the public yourself. You can short-circuit that. The second one is networking. It's great that you're all here for this conference. It's amazing, but there are only so many conferences that you can go to, both for resources and also for time. But the emerging practice is actually meeting people and posting preprint links online and actually talking to people online as well. And this is really cool, really exciting. Same thing with publishing. Traditionally, we post something and we wait for years to find out what the impact is, so to speak. Maybe you can be working on a project for years to figure out that no one's going to cite it. But with the emerging way is you can actually post something which might start off as a blog post, it might start off as a preprint, and you can get that feedback. I know there's a few people now that when they have a new idea, particularly for a review or a methods idea, they'll blog about it. If it gets a lot of hits and a lot of interest, they'll know something's here, and that'll turn into a preprint. If that gets a lot of interest, it'll turn into a paper. They're short-circuiting that feedback loop. And the final thing is, yeah, it's better for science. So our current system reflects an older system of old white men. This is from the Royal Society in England. There's a much better way. Okay, so take-home messages. Science is moving towards an open and reproducible model. In about 10 to 20 years' time, we're going to look back at this time going, wow, why didn't we adopt open science practices more? And it's not going to be, it's funny, there's a joke that says, what do you call alternative medicine that's actually being given evidence that it works? Just medicine. It's going to be exactly the same with science. In 20 years' time, there's not going to be this open science versus non-open science. It's just going to be science. So you may as well get on the train now. It's science done right. And it's good for society, your career, and for science in general. So, I'm just going to give a quick overview of what we are going to be doing over the next day and a half. First thing, we're going to be p-hacking. I told you that p-hacking before was bad for science, but I'm going to actually show you how easy it is and how easy it is to fool yourself when it comes to p-hacking. I'm going to do a crash course in R and Jamovi and JASP. So hopefully you have that all loaded on your computers, ready to go. Reason we're doing this is because these packages are free and reproducible. A lot of people within psychology are using SPSS. Although SPSS syntax can of course be exported and used, a lot of people, if they don't have an SPSS license, it doesn't really help you with it doesn't actually encourage reproducible research. But if you're using R, Jamovi, or JASP, anyone can download this, anyone can access this, and anyone can reproduce your analysis. Then we're going to be looking at an evidence for a null model. There's not much point in doing hypothesis-driven research if you can't falsify hypotheses. So we're going to be looking at using Bayesian and frequentist approaches on looking at evidence for a null model. I'm going to be doing power analysis. This is always an interesting one. And how to do this using both R and Jamovi. Pre-registration, so we're going to be looking at a data set. You're going to be pre-specifying hypotheses of what you believe the data is going to look like, doing your analysis and going through the entire pipeline of what you would typically do with a paper, but we're going to do this within an hour or two with a data set and almost to the point of posting the preprint as well. Then tomorrow, we are going to make a website in about an hour. Fingers crossed, maybe an hour and a half. So by the end, we'll see how we go. The more publications you have, the longer it'll take. So by the end of this workshop, if you don't already have one, you're all going to have your own personal websites. And if you already have one, this is maybe handy for making a website for your lab, for instance. Then we're going to be doing, looking at reproducible meta-analysis and finishing off with a little mini workshop on the benefits of using social media for your career, but also for open research. Okay, that's all for the first one. Let's take a quick 2-minute break and then we will get started with the first session on p-hacking.